Democratic socialism works everywhere it's tried. As case in point, let's point down to, well, I don't know, Venezuela. This young man, Jose Nino, a survivor of Venezuela. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, John.
All right, so now your folks basically figured out it was time to leave Venezuela before it all broke apart. You're a very lucky young man. How did they know?
Well, in the 1990s, Venezuela was undergoing several IMF reforms that had some good measures, but also some bad measures as well. And then at that same time period, Venezuela experienced several coups conducted by then Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Chavez. And at that point, the Venezuelan political system was completely in shambles. My parents saw the writing on the wall, and they decided to do what's best for my sister and I's future and went to the U.S. for greener pastures.
And wow. All right, now I've been told that when it was working down there, oil was pumping, people were getting good health care, people were getting food, life was good. It seemed to be the jewel of socialism. You remember that, don't you?
Well, if we're talking about the Hugo Chavez era, he did have high oil prices, but the economic growth that Venezuela experienced during Hugo Chavez's regime was mostly going to the state because the Venezuelan government has owned the oil industry since the 1970s. And since then, the standard of living of the average Venezuelan has deteriorated. Many people forget that in 1998, the average Venezuelan was poorer than 1958. And Hugo Chavez actually used that to his advantage to consolidate his power and eventually get elected in 1998. Unfortunately, he not only continued the same flawed policies of the past 60 years in Venezuela, but he also doubled down and introduced a tyrannical element to them as well.
When you say failed policies, what failed policy?
For example, price controls, land expropriation. The oil industry was expropriated in the 1970s, but when Hugo Chavez came to the power, he started expropriating all sorts of private property, land holdings, ranches, businesses, international corporations, you name it. And he just accelerated it to a point where by the time he died, Venezuela was in shambles.
Let's talk about, for me, I'm always a junkie for monetary policy. And that without a stable form of currency, things can go crazy because government takes care of its debt by inflating it. So right now, price inflation is rampant. People are comparing what's going on in Venezuela today to what happened to Germany just before Hitler took power because the money's just not worth anything. What is the inflation rate in Venezuela right now?
Depends on the numbers. You see, I'm not too sure, but I have seen some estimates where it's hovering around 12,000 to 14,000%. And that is...
So 12,000, not 12%, not 1,200%, 12,000%, which means it's exploding by the minute.
Yes, that is correct. It's essentially hyperinflation, and it should not be a shock because there are certain figures from the Venezuelan central bank in 2017 that showed that the central bank was increasing the money supply by 10% on a weekly basis. And any astute observer of monetary economics will know that when you increase the money supply at that amount, inflation is going to ensue one way or the other.
All right, so there's still a fascination in this country with holdouts like Cuba and Venezuela as examples of socialism. Now, when it was working, everyone seemed to go, see, it does work. Now that it's exploding and there are food riots, there's criminal activity, people are starving to death, I hear the media say, well, that wasn't really socialism. Didn't John Oliver have a piece on this saying, well, that really wasn't government control? What did he say?
Well, he characterized Venezuela as an epic case of mismanagement, but this is a typical type of argument many on the left use to evade the real consequences of socialism. They're in complete denial that socialism has a terrible track record of failure. wherever it's implemented, whether it be the Soviet Union, Vietnam, present day Venezuela, you name it, and they just try to cast it off as, oh, this is corruption, when any careful analysis of socialism and what it's based on will tell you that it's flawed from the start when you eliminate a price system, you eliminate the incentive to work, and you destroy property rights.
Well, the other part of when you destroy pricing, pricing is an information system. That's how you know what is real. When something is priced at a market level, you know what the supply is, you know what the demand is. That is a feedback system you need. When you start monkeying with that and putting subsidies here and price controls over there, then nobody can make an accurate decision on supply. They can't make accurate decisions on demand. Sooner or later, it gets clogged up. I'm just curious. Have you gone there since you were a kid? When was the last time you were back in Venezuela?
I've been there on multiple occasions in the 2000s. The last time I went there was 2010, and there were shortages emerging because price controls have been in effect since 2006, and they've doubled down since 2012 because of the rampant inflation and just the shortages, thinking that if you lower the prices more, somehow like goods will reemerge. But
the prices are great prices if only some of the supply was available.
Yeah.
Tell me what that looks like. You were there, you saw the beginning of it. What does it look like? If I went there right now and I took a camera, what is it I'd see?
You would see long lines, and even when I was there, the lines were not that bad, but now you see lines like as if it were like for like some type of rock concert, if you will, for just basic items.
Food is just like a rock concert, really. Yeah.
And now it's actually so bad that most people that have the resources will just go to the black market instead and buy their goods, because waiting in 3 hours in line just to get toilet paper is just absurd.
When you say they go to the black market, what do they pay with in the black market if their currency is worth nothing?
There are a number of Venezuelans that are able to obtain dollars, and now with the emergence of crypto...
When you say dollars, you mean American dollars?
Yes.
Wow. So still the American dollar, even as inflated as it is still the world currency. That has value there.
Yes, the dollar's reserve status does give it a considerable advantage over currencies like the Bolivar, the Venezuelan currency. So it'll be the currency of choice for a lot of Venezuelans now that their money is pretty much worthless. Or if they have functioning electricity, they will turn to cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, whatever, to conduct transactions.
I'm curious about that because you need a computer system, you need a phone, you need some way to transfer cryptocurrencies. Are people working for crypto? Are they buying and selling things for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin?
Yes, Venezuela has a unique characteristic that it has a very strong tech sector. There's a lot of computer programmers and highly skilled tech professionals there. So Bitcoin has been able to somewhat establish itself there despite all the economic chaos and institutional uncertainty.
Does the government try to shut down Bitcoin?
It has tried to shut down mining equipment, confiscating certain computers and servers, but the power of Bitcoin is the fact that it's it's a denationalized currency, so the state just can't always control it. But the government has tried to create its own state-owned cryptocurrency, the Petro, as a way to compete with it. But it's probably going to fail, more than likely.
Because it's not limited. It is not restrained like Bitcoin is.
Yeah, that is correct. It's a state boondoggle that has non-transparent exchange rates because it's supposedly backed by oil, but that's dubious. And like anything the government touches, especially in economic affairs, it just turns out to be terrible in the long run.
All right, we've got about a minute or so. You sit there and you talk with your folks and you talk with your sister. What is the lesson that you guys talk about? What is it that, in a real world, you still have family down there? What is it you guys talk about? What is it you say, oh my God, I'm glad for this and I'm so worried for that?
We talk about how thankful we are to live in a country that nominally respects property rights and allows for basic commerce like the United States. And I've educated not just my sister and my parents, but also close family relatives on the fact that the plight Venezuela is facing is because of economic ignorance and the actions of tyrannical despots that could care less for the laws of economics.
What's the warning for people in the United States?
My warning is very simple. Many people tend to forget that Venezuela was a first world country at one point, and it eventually adopted a form of social democracy from 1958 to 1998, and it declined through a process of death by 1,000 cuts. And then Hugo Chavez came in and doubled down on the flawed policies of that era and just destroyed the country. And just like Rome didn't build itself in one day, it also didn't collapse in one day.
Lessons. People want to read what you write. Where do they go?
You can follow me on Twitter, on my Twitter handle, Jose Al Nino, or you could go on Mises.org or Gunpowder Magazine to follow my works.
Terrific. I'm glad you're here. I hope people learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Listen
having
for
me
me on KHOW Radio. Read me in the Denver Post. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute. We'll see you next week.